A very good Nietzschean morning to you all. Nietzsche is one of the most fascinating people you'll ever have to deal with. Certainly not easy. He would never want anybody to call him easy. He represents very sort of, perhaps in the best possible way, someone who is taking part in his society at the time of, this is the end of the 19th, towards the end of the 19th century, taking a look at that society and seeing how he could contribute to waking people up. So he is mostly a reformer, even though he differed with Socrates on many specific points. He's pretty much like what he did in the 19th century in Europe was sort of like what Socrates had done in his Athens of the around the 5th century before the Common Era. To understand Nietzsche fully, therefore, one must take his own understanding of what he was doing. And therefore, in my lecture, this is not going to be a replacement for a detailed philosophical specialized study of Nietzsche. You can do that in different ways, but it's kind of to put you into the whole cultural atmosphere of the time and basically to help you appreciate just how important this person was and the influence he continues to have right up into our own day. Now, if you notice on the sheet that I've given you, by the way, the second sheet are slides that are part of the PowerPoint presentation. These presentations are on the web, so you can just go back to them anyway on the web. But I have handed out some of the key, but they're present. I had them in a better form than this. I'm sorry, I didn't check which was being used. But anyway, so if you take a look at the fly sheet I've given you, Prophet of a Dying Civilization. I want to make a few comments on just some of these titles there. People looking back at Nietzsche from many perspectives, actually, see in him a prophet, not in a religious sense, so don't worry about that, but someone who can read the times, the signs of the times, can see more deeply about what's going on, and can actually shed light on what is going on in a sense that as a warner, to warn people, to warn the civilization where it's going. The main item in it that is, of course, the mediocrity, and so to understand Nietzsche, it's back to the ancient Greek sort of discussion between mediocrity and excellence. The Greeks were fascinated by what is excellence and what you have to do to be an excellent human being and what's an excellent society and excellence. And the worst thing, therefore, is the opposite of it, and that is mediocrity, complacency, being satisfied too easily, living in your comfort zone, we would say today, not being open to having your own cherished beliefs challenged so that you think about them a bit more deeply than you have. And under the second part of that fly sheet, the Nietzschean hammer, that will be explained a little later, but perspectivism. This is an extremely important part, a way to approach Nietzsche, because he himself says that basically every philosophy is really, if it's serious, he would be saying, it's the autobiography of the philosopher. And therefore, the more you can know about the life and the times of the philosopher, the more you'll be able to have a chance of really understanding what that person was trying to do. Now, the person's philosophy, of course, becomes something that's available to read and study and learn from and get something from. That, of course, that survives in its own universal, in its own sort of autonomous way. But in CVSP, in this kind of a course of cultural studies and civilization studies, it's more important to sort of be motivated to go into these people more deeply, but first to have as broad a perspective on what they were doing. So perspectivism is not the same thing as relativism. I don't think he would be very happy with people thinking of him as a relativist in the way relativism is thought of today. Perspectivism is the admission, the recognition that you're only a human being, and therefore when you are speaking about things, as important as you may think it is, it's always a simplification of the truth, all right? But you get better simplifications and worse simplifications. And so simplification or simplifying and falsifying is another extremely important aspect of Nietzsche's, what Nietzsche's legacy is to people who wish to take him as seriously as possible. Basically, the recognition that each philosophy is a perspective. There's no final absolute perspective that everybody has to follow, or else they're stupid or irrational or or whatever. There are perspectives. This is admission. This is humility. This is academic humility and human humility, of course. That never to think you are going to know everything about everything, and that your perspective is the only one. However, you should be looking into your perspective as critically as possible, as he was doing all the time, and that's his legacy. So, philosophy is autobiography. By the way, the references there are to his aphorisms in the book, because I still like us to have the whole book available with us in class. And so we can take a look at each of these references from the book, Beyond Good and Evil. Okay, so let's take a look at what I have for you and what I can do for you at this time. Okay, Nietzsche. That slide there is to show that there are, as many Nietzsches as there are people studying Nietzsche in a sense, and this is always the mark of a great work, that it's not simplistic, it's not just, you can look at it very easily, put it into a computer, get the, the digital output about the words and all this. This is a human being who was very serious himself about life, and who lived, as much as we can tell, what he preached. So I call this the tragic trajectory, because I find in him, if we're going all through CVSP, I find in Nietzsche the best of what the tragic thinkers had always been presenting. Sophocles and his Oedipus and Antigone, just some examples. But this is a model of a tragic life, in the meaning that the life is serious, the life is full, the life is giving lots to humanity, giving lots of self-respect to the person themselves, right? But there's no obvious reward for the person who's doing, great things for his own self-respect and for humanity generally. Nietzsche certainly lived in a way that he was, you can see he was constantly really being self-critical more than anything else. And what he did wake up a lot of the European world in many, many different ways. Those who agreed with him and those who disagreed with him could not avoid the challenge that he was bringing to everything that was popular in his day. And I want to focus on that. To be Nietzschean means in your day, you have to look at what you have to criticize in your day and not just repeat what he happened to be criticizing, unless you're really convinced that nothing has changed since his day. Basically, some people see, idolize him. He's a god. Some people think he's a devil. He's a demon. Some people think he's an angel of light. An angel who brings things that seem to be true, but is really just deceiving you. Others think of him as a genius, as a madman, as a prophet. But one of his own books was called Human, All Too Human. I think finally that's how we should look at anyone we're studying. And he wrote a book called Human, All Too Human. He was a tortured soul. He was, his famous "God is dead." You cannot understand Nietzsche just by reading that slogan there. It's a much deeper thing than just sort of what I would call garden variety atheism, like there's garden variety religion and all that. There's also garden variety atheism. This wasn't just a garden variety atheist. This was a man who was really looking at what did it mean, what does atheism mean, and what does it imply for the human being, and how does one have to respond to that, and how can one respond to that in the deepest possible way that a free human being can do. So human, all too human, but he was a tortured soul. Obviously, somebody who wants to be like that is not going to be popular. And he says this about himself in where he writes about his own works. He was a tortured soul. He was not just saying God is dead. He was seeking God in one way all through his life. But he was also a God killer in the sense of that he was destroying all sort of understandings of God that he saw as being extremely superficial and just a cop-out and just a way of sort of justifying your mediocrity and hypocrisy and all of that. So I just mentioned 3 books that have influenced me, of course, and there are many others. But Kaufman, Walter Kaufman, Kurt Reinhardt, I depend a lot on because for the biographical material, and William Barrett. These are people who have written interesting works where they write about Nietzsche in a general way. Kaufman, of course, has translated many of his works and written everything about it. William Barrett's book is a very interesting book, generally speaking. And we have our own Peter Bornedal, who has shown that those who say Nietzsche is not a philosopher, that in fact he was a philosopher plus. He was at least a philosopher, but he was much more than what a garden variety philosopher is understood to be. And it's that aspect of Nietzsche that I'm going to be focusing on in this course, the broadest aspect. But Peter Bornedal is a world-accepted figure in terms of Nietzsche studies and showing how much you can get of even specialized philosophical stuff out of Nietzsche. So philosophy as autobiography. Now this is not a new item. The people have been talking about this continually. Goethe and Hegel says that they both believe that you can't really understand a text, and there of course people don't agree with that, but you can't really understand a text if you don't fully understand also as much as you can the biography of the person writing it. So Shakespeare produced Hamlet, but those who are against this kind of a view, they say, look, we have the text of Hamlet. Let's look at Hamlet. Who cares who wrote it, whether it was Shakespeare or Peter Shebaya, or whoever you think might have written it, or Shakespeare. It doesn't matter. We have the text. We look at the text. Those are people who think the text is the heart of everything. And of course, the text, you cannot avoid the text. But for these people, there was a stream of thinking that basically also to understand a text, and certainly to understand the philosophy of a significant philosopher, you have to understand as much as you possibly can of the life of that person. And that's one of the reasons why Nietzsche, following Goethe, he was very much influenced by Goethe. He calls Goethe's letters to Eckermann, that's where you get a lot of the autobiography of Goethe himself, the best German book. And then he and people like Hegel developed this notion that life and text together will give you a much better insight into what this person was all about. So you have this, in his Thus Spake Zarathustra, in his Ecce Homo. You had this in the past with, of course, Augustine, who, you cannot understand Augustine's philosophizing except in the context of the times he was in and what he was, what he was investigating and his own life. Goethe, Nietzsche. Useful references, I've mentioned The Existential Revolt, a book written only in 1960, but it still has a lot of if you want a good look at a lot of the autobiographical material that Nietzsche writes about himself. Irrational Man by William Barrett is a very interesting book in itself, and to understand what was going on in the 20th century in the philosophical world with the entrance of existential thinking, and not just theoretical philosophy, but existential philosophy that very much was influenced by people like Nietzsche. Peter Bornedal's book, The Surface and the Abyss, the title itself is extremely important. That one of the main things Nietzsche was focusing on once again. He wasn't the first in history to do this, others had done this before, but he was now focusing once again on the importance of looking beneath the surface of things. Don't just look at the outside, don't just look at what you get on the web about somebody, don't look at your first encounter with someone, the surface, and the abyss, because truth is in the abyss more than in the surface, and Peter Bornedal will develop this theme in his book, The Surface and the Abyss, in a very interesting, some of it is very technical, but some of the chapters there are very well worth your looking into to get this sort of this Nietzschean influence on people in the 21st century. Walter Kaufman, many works. Beyond Good and Evil is the book we have always been using here. Now you can get part of it on the web. I've asked my students to use the book. Some of us have, this is an option. Some teachers prefer to have the whole book so that we can take a look at other aphorisms, not just the ones that are in that selection. Okay, this is a quick, I have this, I think, on your thing there. I don't want to waste time on his biography, but this is the time, he was living the last part of the 19th century. And basically, he was born in a Lutheran family, so he was religious as a young man. in the Lutheran way of being religious, and the Christianity, of course, that he is basically interacting with is the kind of North European Protestant Lutheran type of Christianity. So, he writes about all of Christianity, of course, but remember the part of Christianity he's writing about is his experience of the Protestant North European type of approach to understanding Christianity. He dies, he enters Bonn University as a student of theology and philology, transfers to Leipzig University, abandons his study of theology. He encounters the works of Arthur Schopenhauer, the great pessimist, but he's influenced very much by that work. He was appointed chair of the classical philology at Basel. He was awarded his doctorate from Leipzig without examination. That's just an indication of the capacity that this man had. He publishes his first book, The Birth of Tragedy. And so tragedy is an extremely important part of, if you understand what tragedy really means, not just something negative, but it's a whole way of understanding the world. The Birth of Tragedy. He resigns his post at Basel, and then he has mental followed by physical collapse. And what happens to him at the end of his life, different people have said it's because of his, he got syphilis because he used to go to prostitute houses. Others say that, the mental collapse certainly partially must be attributed to the high standard he set for himself. Authenticity becomes the great slogan in existential thinking in the 20th century, that the most important value is authenticity, and the worst thing is duplicity or inauthenticity or mauvaise foi, saying something but not as honestly as you possibly can present it, but with an agenda behind it, using it for something else. That authenticity, you should always be checking whatever you're doing, whatever you're believing, whatever you're saying. The main reference is it authentic, and is it really coming from your life? Is it really coming from the best that you can use your reason on? Is it something you're really ready to live, as well as just preach to others? Authenticity becomes the heart of existential thinking in the 20th century. And this was the heart of his whole ethos, his whole spirit. He died in 1900. His major works, just the titles themselves, will give you a nice glance about the sort of things he was interested in. The Birth of Tragedy, human, all too human. The Joyful Wisdom, not a wisdom that, he used to look at say, if you believe you have a Redeemer, I want to see the Redeemer on your faces, that God is dead meant for him that the Christian society around him, he was not seeing anything of a God in them. He was seeing, a dead God if they represent God. Because in monotheism, supposedly the community is supposed to reflect God, and if they don't reflect God, then there's no proof for the existence of God abstractly. Either this God means something and is being lived out, and you can see the effects. And certainly joy is a major thing in terms of the Christian thought. That Christ brings joy, Christ brings peace, Christ brings freedom. He looks at them, he says, all I see is a bourgeois society that's only interested in their outside surface appearance, his hypocrisy. They've reduced anything that might have been serious in anything that's come to them from the past, their Christian or their Greek past, into sort of just isms and useful congregations of sheep and herd and stuff like that. Thus Spake Zarathustra is one of his most famous works, of course. The will to power, as opposed to the supremacy of reason. If you took 203, and you notice in the modern period, a lot of the thing went to focusing on reason and the supremacy of reason. And reason as they understood reason, of course, because you don't just say reason. We have to see what is meant by reason. So there were many reactions against this idolization of reason. In the French Revolution, they actually tore down Christian altars and churches and erected an edifice to reason, the worship of reason. So this extreme dependence upon what they call reason, one of the main things he's bringing us back to is the importance of will, the importance of decision, the importance of our freedom, the importance of what we do, our creativity, our activity, the will. And he calls it the will to power, and that, of course, really has to be studied carefully, because the will to power, as he himself was very upset with, was, for instance, taken up by the Nazis. to mean that, we naturally, because of Darwin and evolution and the struggle for existence, and, naturally speaking, the superior race is the Aryan race, and so therefore, the superior human should impose their power on everybody else. This was not what he meant by it whatsoever. He was just saying that, everything we do is imposing our power on something. Now, you can impose that power as a Nazi imposes it, or if you understand Nietzsche, I think, as Nietzsche has been understood by many people, that he had nothing to do with sort of physical power or physical arrogance or physical oppression of everything, but the power of authenticity, the power of, really, whatever you do, imposing your will to authenticity rather than to hypocrisy or to just getting along or to avoiding suffering. Or for him, if you live just to avoid suffering, you'll never get anything serious. For him, suffering is not your enemy. Suffering, on the contrary, is your access to depth in life and in truth. Beyond good and evil is an indication of the fact that people follow a set rule, whatever society they're in or whatever religion they're in. The tendency is to follow like sheep or like a herd, to follow whatever is being given to you. What is what's the standard of good and evil in my society? All right. The beyond good and evil is a return to all the great thinkers throughout the centuries before him, that, in fact, the systems of morality that we have, insofar as they have any life in them, have been developed by people who have been critical about their societies. Socrates' revolution was to take the polytheistic gods and make out of them intellectual forms. Each one, many people had done this in their own societies. In the Christian world, and Augustine would tell you, you're stupid if you read Genesis literally. It wasn't until Darwin came that Christians realized they shouldn't be trying to make out of Genesis a book of biology or science. But anyway, the morality that we have, anything that's there, because the test for him is, does it give life? Is you're following this system, is it giving life? Is it life enhancing? Or is it just sort of giving you more for your own comfort, for your own laziness, for your own mediocrity? A whole civilization, it's a twilight of a whole civilization. This great Greco-Roman and monotheistic world that had come to him by his time in Europe, and this is the heights of civilization and all of this. He saw in it the seeds of its own destruction, that it was headed for a disaster because it had lost the yearning for life in what it was believing in, and sort of taking out the creativity in everything that was there. On the genealogy of morals, so looking at how morals have developed and what he then calls slave morality and master morality, the Antichrist indicates his own personal grappling with his own Christian belief, which he had held deeply up until he was a young man, and so he was always sort of, in a sense, Christ was always his model in a sense, but he wanted to reject Christ if Christ becomes something that you just, you use as something to depend upon. You have to be Christ if you really think Christ is important. You have to be God if you think God is important. In other words, the gods and Christ and all of this mean nothing unless they get human beings to live a certain life that seems to be higher than just the ordinary seeking for wealth and pleasure and survival and all of that. Ecce homo, again, I'll come to in a minute. Twilight of the idols. You see, the whole civilization is in its twilight, and it's lost its verve and vigor. Beyond good and evil, he calls it a prelude to a philosophy of the future. The beyond. So meaning here, the beyond meaning here, not, that you don't, you're now killing and stealing and cheating is good or something like that. It's that beyond just taking it at its surface level, looking into the abyss, looking at what's behind the meaning of these words. If the meaning of these words turn out to be producing mediocre humans, then the good, what you're calling evil might be the true good, and what you're calling good might be the true evil. You have to look at this with a bit more depth than just what is called good and what is called evil, and what has been accepted by your society, or what is politically correct at the university today, or what is on the media, what's coming at you today, or you have to be looking at in your own day what is being proposed to you as being good and being evil. And you have to look beyond them to see, well, what does good mean? What does evil mean? For him, good means life-enhancing. Good means challenging you. Good means anything good is that which challenges you, which causes you to be harder on yourself, to be more sort of, not sort of benefiting mankind, as he says, like in a good, nice, liberal way. You build hospitals, but so people will vote for you. But you're as a human, you're a very inauthentic person. It's not, it's not the outside that's being done, but is what you are doing with a Nietzschean spirit. Is it, and what he would think of himself as doing this with a spirit of as honest as he could, as authentic a spirit as he could. So the good is that which gives life, that which gives joy, that which gives freedom, that which gives all the things Christ supposedly represents in Christianity, but which he doesn't see Christians actually living. Once he looks at them, he says, when I look at you and you claim to have a redeemer, somebody's bringing freedom and all this, I don't see anything of it in your faces. All I see is a dead God. Twilight of the Idols. And now, why a hammer? How one philosophizes with a hammer. And so you've got to understand, he's not doing traditional classical philosophy and argumentation. The book that is in aphorisms. And aphorisms have a power of sort of making you to think beyond just a formula. All right? If you have a philosophy and it gives you the formula and, this argument and that argument and this argument, and therefore now you should all follow me with my conclusions of what I've given you in this argument. Aphorisms challenge you much more sort of concretely to think about really serious items, not just to get lost in an argument or an abstract thing or somebody preaching at you, but to kind of have to face whatever it is he's trying to get you to think about seriously in the aphorism that's there. Now, how one philosophizes with a hammer is that Socrates has said of himself he was like a Polus fly. He was like the big fly that wakes the horse up. And then the polis meant the community, the city. So Socrates saw himself as doing that sort of thing in Athens, that he was trying to wake them up, challenging them. They think they know this, they think they know this, they think they know this. Socrates says the beginning of wisdom is to know you don't know. He's the wisest man in Athens, supposedly, Apollo says of him, but he investigates it and finally accepts it, not because the god told him, but because he's investigated and seen that he's the only one in Athens who is aware of his own ignorance. He's the only one who's aware that he's ignorant. Doesn't think he knows everything just because he's reached a certain level of specialization. Now he knows, and so now he can talk about everything in the world and the theories of everything, and and guide everybody in their lives and everything. The humility of knowing your limits, of knowing what you are capable of talking about, and so hammering away at all the popular views of his day. How one philosophizes with a hammer, not with just an argument. He presents arguments all the time, but he wants to really challenge you to, wake up. Like in Plato's cave, the prisoner has to be turned around forcibly and resist. It's that same notion that to really come out of a cave, out of ignorance, out of thinking you know everything, you need to be challenged and shocked. A Socratic shock, and now in the modern period, a Nietzschean shock. The book Ecce Homo is taken from the Christian world, of the Christian New Covenant, the Scriptures, where Pilate, when the leaders of the Jews want to condemn Jesus to death, they have to take him to the Roman authority because they're not allowed to put people to death. So they send him to and Pilate, the Roman emperor, the Roman consul there. He's convinced that this man is a good man and doesn't believe what the leaders of the Jews are telling him. He tries to protect him. So he has him scourged and tortured, thinking that will satisfy their desire for revenge, because he could see that what they primarily wanted was revenge. There was no question of justice here, and for whatever reason they wanted to get rid of him, and so he presents him, and the Latin is Ecce Homo, behold the man. So Nietzsche writes a book called Ecce Homo, behold the man, and of course the man now is not Christ, it's Nietzsche. Because in this sense, for a Christian, anything important is what you get from the figure of Christ. Christianity is about the revelation of God in a human being rather than just in texts. So now he is taking the place of Christ in a sense of saying it's not a question of just these are people he has, some of the people in the 20th century who were very influenced by Nietzsche. But there are 4 passages in Ecce Homo, very interesting. One of them he entitles "Why I Am So Wise," "Why I Am So Prudent," why I am writing such excellent books, and why I am a Fates. Now, if you just look at that superficially, you think, oh, this guy has a problem, he's paranoid, put him away in a mental hospital. But what he means by, if you understand, if you read what he's doing, and you get into Nietzsche, he's saying, take a look at what I'm saying. Take a look at what I'm challenging this society with. Take a look at what I'm exposing and the hypocrisy and the mediocrity in this thing, and you will see why I am so wise. Remember Socrates. Socrates, he's wise because he discovers everybody else thinks they're wise. He's the only one who knows he's not wise. So in a sense, this is Nietzsche being influenced in this way by Socrates, why am I so wise? Because what I'm writing is much more along the lines of what you should want to call wisdom than all the stuff you've not just you haven't even understood, but you've corrupted and you've turned it all into sort of just justifications for your mediocrity. Why I'm so prudent, why I'm writing such excellent books, why I'm a Fate, meaning take what I am saying, take the things that I'm doing, take it as my presentation to you of what a human being, what would really make a human life worthwhile. Now, these are some points from his autobiography, which are very interesting because it rounds out the figure of the sort of just the Nietzsche and just God is dead and he's to see the human behind it all, because there's a human behind the hammer, there's a human behind the philosopher. It's very important to see that. If you get a hard, cruel person behind what they're writing about, well, okay, you might want to read what they're writing about, but if they're telling you about loving others and about, doing good for all that, you'll wonder a little bit about what was going on here. His war strategy, in his own words, to attack only matters that are victorious. So if you want to be Nietzschean today, attack the things that are victorious in the academic world. Because remember, he's talking primarily to the academic world, to the people who are thinkers. He's not just talking, to every. He's talking to people who can read his books. He's reading to all that. What is victorious at your university? What is victorious in the world of politics and thought today? That would be what that's what would attract a Nietzsche today. To look at that and see where that is going. Where that is hypocrisy, where that is inauthentic, where that is that. Not just to repeat, attacking the things that in his own day were where he was. Only where he stands alone, without any allies. You see, he doesn't want to be popular. He's ready to be unpopular. Never to attack persons. So he's never attacking a person. He showed great respect for individual humans. But to use them only as a huge magnifying glass, to make visible some creeping but as yet intangible crisis. So you look at these people, not because you want to attack them as a human, as a person they are, but what they now seem to represent. What kind of thinking are they giving us? What kind of direction are they giving us? So if you see somebody is what you think is warping society or doing that, and people not noticing it, that's what Nietzsche thought he was doing in his own critical work. His self-evaluation. He says, I have contradicted as no one has dared contradict. Nevertheless, the opposite of a spirit of negation. See, he's not a nihilist. There may be some things at some stages in his life that led people to think of him as he never thought of himself as a nihilist, right, in the strict sense of the specialist meaning of it. He says, I'm the opposite of a spirit of negation. I'm the bearer of glad tidings, good news. The gospel is good news, you see, and he's giving you his gospel of good news, glad tidings. A yea-sayer with whom the hope of the human race has been restored. All these are taken from his Christian background, of course, because Jesus, is the yea-sayer. That's your, So if you look at those first, just a few of those things on the first part of the thing, and you can see when you take a look at the Gospels and the way they present Jesus and see how much he was influenced by this. His attack against it was primarily for the attack about the people who were presenting it and representing it and teaching it in whatever they want. So at one point he says the only Christian was Christ. This is the man that's wielding the hammer. A man of spiritual depth, he says, needs friends. See, he was ready to just be alone in order to be authentic. Unless he still has God as a friend. But I have neither God nor friends. And then he says, for thus it has always been, and thus it will always be. One cannot aid a cause more effectively than by persecuting it, by hunting it with all hounds. This I have done. So what was he attacking? He thought by attacking it, he was actually bringing life back to it. This is the true sense of a reformer of something, not just someone who wants to destroy something. But wanting to see something that's worth attacking because it's victorious, but by persecuting it, you force it to rethink itself, you force it to revalue its own values, you force it to bring back whatever was of life that was there that allowed it to live on. All alone with myself, he says, I am in danger of losing myself in a forest. I need help, I need disciples, I also need a teacher, a master. He was always cognizant of, he wasn't sort of, another god or presenting himself as as knowing everything. All right? I should find it sweet to obey. If only I could find someone capable of clarifying for me the value of our moral ideas. I'm ready to obey, but only something that, I think is worth obeying. Nobody's showing me. I find no one, no disciples, to say nothing of teachers. And two incidents that I liked very, very much from the time I was a student studying Nietzsche, when I discovered these things. A Sunday morning incident in Nice in France. He was walking on a Sunday morning with a friend of his who was following him in his philosophy. And a young girl comes by and says, "Good morning, Professor Nietzsche. You're going to church, of course, because it's Sunday morning." So he said, "Yes, yes, of course." And so they walk on, and the guy says, "Sure, you're going to church. What hypocrisy." Is this inauthenticity? No. He says, not every truth is for everyone. That's so naive. That's so stupid. That's so arrogant. You can just, bulldoze truth onto everybody. You have to look at the person. You have to look at who you're talking to. You have to look at your audience. You have to look at what you're doing. He wants to attack somebody who needs to be attacked. All right. This one was not. She wasn't pretending to know everything. He wasn't somebody. He didn't want to know. You should be an atheist. You should be a Nietzsche. And you should be. Not every truth is for everyone. If I had troubled the heart of this young girl, I should have felt disconsolate. I wouldn't have been happy to bother this person. And again, with an astronomer in Florence, after he'd gone in and spoke to him because he'd been reading his books, he comes out and he speaks to the person who is writing this. "I wish this man had not read my books. He's too good. My influence on him could be very disastrous." You see, this is a mature person who has empathy, who, isn't just, railroading his own latest perspective on everybody else, Okay, and this is just, I think it's on your things there so you can read it later. This is just one of the sort of his struggle with God, the God that he was leaving, and he always kind of, this was a great struggle. It was always this leaving God and not leaving God, being influenced by this God and not being influenced by this God. It was all through his life. It wasn't something that he did at one point in his life and he abandoned, he threw all that off, and at the end of his life he says, "I hope I'll never be ungrateful to how much I got from my Christianity and all that." So interestingly, towards the end of his life, he's reading Pascal, and he underlines these words: "Without the Christian faith, you will be to yourself a monster and a chaos." Nietzsche underlined these words. So he's always struggling back and forth with, you don't leave something that important that easily. You don't just leave it all fully. There are some things there that you better not leave because they are important enough that if you don't follow these basic things, you're going to be a monster and a chaos, whatever society, whatever your belief is. If there were gods, how could I bear it not to be a god? You see, this is the other aspect of Nietzsche, you see. But it's not simplistic. Don't take these things literally. You've got to take the whole package if you really want to understand what the man is saying in this cultural. Now, when you're doing a philosophical study of certain things he does there, you have to be more specific and specialized and do that. But to understand the human in this cultural type of course, I believe in the ancient Germanic saying, he says, "All the gods must die." And then the madman that influenced Khalil Gibran's the prophet, the madman, "Have you not heard?" All right, there. Now, just this passage from it: "God is dead," from the gay science. In the madman, he comes out into the street at night, and I don't have time for that. Let's focus on this. There is time for it. The God is dead. What does that mean? God remains dead. Okay. Does this mean some sort of simple atheism? "And we have killed him, yet his shadow still looms. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us?" And this is the heart of it, humanly speaking. Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? So this is not just a simple atheism. It's a sort of saying, what God represents is authenticity, greatness, all of this, a true God, not the gods that you are seemingly not able to live. But then that's what we have to learn from all these things. We need to become gods. We need to be the Prometheus, if you remember the ancient Greek view. It's not the gods who help humanity, it's Prometheus who steals fire for them. We must become gods simply to appear worthy of it. So it's a challenge to live life at its best, at its highest, at its most authentic. It's not just a way of saying, well, now I don't have to worry about any religious beliefs or anything like that. Thus the cycle began, and it goes on. But where will it end? After having run the full course, where are we to turn? Perhaps we will have to make a new start with faith, perhaps a Catholic faith. You see, it was already recognized as Christian, the Christian philosophy, and when you're talking about Darwin, the Christian philosophy, the Christian science. Anybody who wants to attack Christianity, it's a very easy way to sort of build a straw man of Christianity and then go and blow it away. But Georges Lemaitre is the one who formulated the Big Bang theory. Einstein thought it was stupid at first, but then he accepted it. Georges Lemaitre was a Jesuit priest. The Pope writes to him and says, but this is proof for creation. Georges Lemaitre, the Jesuit priest, who was fully a convinced Catholic, tells him, look, I'm doing science. Let's not mix the two. I'm doing science. This is not proof for creation. It's not proof against creation. This is science, and science is ongoing. Science never reaches a final thing. Don't mix science and what religion is supposed to give to the human world. It's this mixture of the two that causes all kinds of misery for humans and for people who have to go into all the stupid arguments. So Christ, the only Christian, a new way of life. You see, Christ was introducing a way of life, not just a dogma, that was to bring peace and harmony to the human soul, so that the pacified soul might then effect the transfiguration of all things, you see. Supposedly for him, Christ meant to come and give the humanity power and set them free and let them be ready to die for what they think is important. And are Christians living like that? They're using Christ as a sort of a backup for whatever bad things they want to do because he's so merciful, he'll forgive me anyway or something. I call Christianity the one great curse, the one immortal mark of shame of the human race. Always back and forth between I hope I shall never show myself ungrateful to Christianity, for I owe to it the best experiences of my childhood. And then, can anyone imagine anything that equals, this is in his genealogy of morals, can anyone imagine anything that equals in miraculously enchanting force the symbol of the Holy Cross? Okay, forget religion here. Right? The symbol of the Holy Cross. Nothing equals in impressive strength that paradox of a crucified God, a God powerful who's ready to give himself to die of his love for humanity. That this, just as a symbol, forget religion for him, of a God crucifying himself for the salvation of men, this sign and symbol triumphs eternally over any other ideal. The last days, when he starts to lose his mind, he starts to have hallucinations of a dual presence of Dionysus and Christ, both of them in representing a kind of life as opposed to something just dead or hypocritical or academic or frozen into a text or something. He starts to identify himself with these two people, with Dionysus and with Christ. Gradual loss of identity. He signed letters on costly papers to Strindberg, the great dramatist. He signed it Nietzsche, Caesar. To the Pope and the Papal Secretary of State and the King of Italy, he signs it the Crucified. To others, he signs it Dionysus. And then there's this incident with an abused horse, and he felt himself being transformed into the dual deity. And this is just an image of it, that this horse was being, whipped and tortured and all this. He runs in and he sort of embraces the horse, to give, to show compassion for that. So at the end of his life, a lot of these things start to come out of the whole psyche, of the whole being, and piano improvisation and singing sublime, wonderfully visionary and unspeakably horrible things about himself as the successor of the defunct God. If you really believe you have to take the place of God, and you take it seriously, all right, then that's going to cause some problems in your thing. And it was coming out now as he was playing the piano. So he was sent to an asylum. in 1889. He was assigned to his mother. Now, the tragedy happened to him, another tragedy for him is when his mother died and he was assigned to his sister. And his sister was close to the Nazis. And she was one of the ones that allowed the Nazis to keep using Nietzsche as somehow that he was supporting the Nazis. And so that's that's the man, that's the person, some biography of the man. The Nietzschean hammer. These are items that your teachers and yourselves might want to go into, as some items you can discuss. The perspectivism, anti-enlightenment, because the Enlightenment meant the supremacy of reason. Talk a little bit more about, well, why reason can mean different things, and if reason starts to become something so abstract and like just what you can do with a computer or something like that, you've lost what reason has always meant before and after the time of the Enlightenment. And so coming back to the life in the human being, the instinct, the will, anti-ideology, okay, everything that starts off well can become just a herd. So in his day, Platonism and Christianism were the main targets, but Kantianism, utilitarianism, socialism, feminism, any ism, anything that has become something you can comfortably join and comfortably hide behind and comfortably think you're doing something because you're hiding behind something that sounds to be wonderful and the latest, reaction against something. He wants, this is the true critic, who wants you to really think about yourself and the spirit in which you're doing things, the spirit of authenticity and creativity and life-giving. The focus is, of course, on that which seemed to be victorious in his day, Platonism and Christianity. And he accuses both from this point of view, that if they mean, and if they don't for Platonists and Christians, but if they mean a flight from reality, or a passport or a visa to soporific mediocrity, then of course he's going to show you that this is evil, not good. In search of authentic humanity. That's his Übermensch, the Superman, the Overman. That this is what he thought was evolution was not about the survival of the fittest, he said. I believe in evolution, but when I look around me concretely, I see it as the survival of the unfittest. It's the mediocre who are ruling. They don't let the excellent show. That was his attack on democracy. See, no matter what its ideals might be, in fact, it produces a world of sort of, nobody's better than anybody and everything's the same, and bringing down somebody who's better than you, dragging them down through your envy, through your sentiment, the terms that he focuses on. Revaluation of values means you have to look at it again. Is what you're believing in simply politically correct, simply because somebody has convinced you with their rhetoric or with their argumentation? Is it something you really are looking into your value in, not only on paper, but also in your life? Are you really looking into your values and revaluing them and bringing the life back out of them, sort of resurrection of the dead of values? The will to power is beyond the supremacy of reason. It's your will that finally gets you to do things, not just what your reason is telling you. Beyond good and evil, okay, and uncritical adherence to conventional morality, and he divides morality into master and slave. And master is the authentic, the one the proactive, the creative, the one that's ready to suffer, the one who's ready to be in solitude. The slave is the one who just follows the leader and wants peace, wants their own, comfort and all this. And the herd, the collective. So. These are standards. They don't fit any one particular philosophy. They're measures that you should be using on any philosophy, any morality, if you want to really be doing what Nietzsche was doing. Survival of the unfittest, eternal recurrence as the radical series of life. There's not just a philosophy of history, that history repeats itself and repeats itself. He was using it in the human sense. In the way you behave. Always behave as you won't have another chance. Because if you always think, well, I have another chance, so I can mess up this one. No, then this is the world of mediocrity. If you take, each thing you're doing, if you try to do it as best you can, all right, then you are saying, I am acting as if what I'm doing now is going to return forever. I'm doing something that's going to influence everything forever. You see, there's a human meaning to all of his main slogans. Leveling, ressentiment. When you're weak, you pretend to be, accepting others. But as soon as you have power, you then oppress them and make use of them. Conformism, pretending now you have the latest. You're so modern now, and you're so up to date, and everybody before you was so bad. And then you really look at yourself, and you're just a conformism. You're wearing the same clothes, you're thinking the same thoughts, you're following the same leaders. This conformism. When it pretends to be creativity and something new, mediocrity, benign liberalism, do-goodness, do-goody, being a do-goody, democracy when it's corrupted in the way it has been, The Athenian democracy executed Socrates. Simplifying and falsifying is the last word there, and very, very important. He says that by just who we are, we're always simplifying. It's like that one person simplifies somebody else. If you don't recognize that whatever you're speaking about is your perspective, and you are simplifying something, but you're simplifying it should be as good as you can do and better than others. But don't ever think you're not simplifying. The things you are studying are always more complex than your latest ability to put it down onto a piece of paper. And when you simplify, you're falsifying. And the falsification is very important because it means there's still room for you to think about this thing. You haven't just done with it, khalas, now that, we can put it aside. No. When you're rejecting something, you're also falsifying it. And that falsification may be actually later on in your life, you're going to come back and see that aspect that I falsified in my great, wonderful simplification might be that's where I'm going to find true life and true authenticity. So, happy-go-lucky with Nietzsche, and I hope you will enjoy your life in a good Nietzschean way. All this is on the web if you want it.